I would like now to introduce today's presenters. Michael Jensen, Chief Research Officer, guides the practice's research agenda and architecture by leveraging his extensive experience to identify and unlock emerging trends. Abhishek Sharma, partner, is a member of the pricing assurance team and assists clients on topics related to price and contract benchmarking, strategy engagement reviews, and sourcing cost rationalization. Ricky Sundrani, Vice President, is a member of the pricing insurance team and assists clients on topics related to price benchmarking, solution review, and contract assessment for IT infrastructure, ADM, and SaaS system integration services. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Michael.
Hello, everybody. It's been one heck of a year. If you look back where we were just 12 months ago, we were really seeing a lot of uncertainty. A lot of things were in turmoil, both at our professional, in the marketplace, with governments, personally. But, I want to talk about, the world has really changed in just the past few months. I was just commenting to the rest of the team here how it's become spring here in Texas, and things are looking up. And what we wanted to do was to have a conversation with you today about what we're seeing, the impact on the outsourcing industry. Okay, and so the reality is we actually did quite good over the past year in the outsourcing industry. Both customers seem to have been happy with the services they received. We tested the word partnership, and largely that was a success in terms of people getting through. And if you look at it from an overall industry perspective, the service provider community has come back pretty nicely. So with that, I wanted to also talk about our 5 convictions. So Abhishek and I are going to run through these. These are things we fundamentally believe in and are the basis for what you're going to see in the upcoming slides and charts. So let's start with that. Enterprises are pursuing the aggressive cost takeout. And this is a very specific to an industry contextual conversation. We know that some industries and clients we talked to, there was very little impact. And in fact, they saw accelerated activity. But in many others, what they found was, a pretty traumatic change in their business model. So things were changing, and they needed to accelerate things that they already had planned, or they needed to accelerate structural cost savings. And so it became the basis for urgency over the second half of last year and continuing into the first half of this year.
Thanks, Michael. So the second conviction that we have is that a lot of enterprises have used the pandemic to drive change. Right? I won't say maybe used, but leverage the opportunity or taken the time to really drive through change. And when we talk about aggressive cost takeout, competitive tension between providers and using that to effect can't be left far behind. So, one of the key features of this rationalization and RFP activity is not just about rate reduction, it's also a bit about structural change, about trying to move from a mix and match of T&M, fixed price, and a bundle of models for the same service to much more streamlined, higher use of agile and managed services kind of an approach to drive better accountability.
So on our third observation here, the window of opportunity is closing in terms of being able to expect large concessions from the supplier community. So what we did see in the second quarter and into the third quarter, but mostly in the second quarter, was a fairly dramatic drop in short-term project revenues. And with that, suppliers were eager to close deals. They were eager to make some concessions. They were eager to help their partners out. But as we see the nearly V-shaped recovery in the outsourcing services marketplace, specifically, or in specific sectors, even more robust than that. What we're seeing is, or feeling and seeing, is that the increased activity resulting in massive stacking of proposals, and the likelihood that we are going to see this window of price concessions closing. So we are encouraging some speed and urgency in this element.
Yeah. The fourth conviction that we have, and we're seeing this quite consistently, is that now historically, if you look at any large enterprise, the number of active outsourced contracts that they would have, could range from a few dozens to actually a few hundreds, right? Even within a particular function, that number could be pretty large. So one of the things is that there's a definite intent to simplify those contracts, and really focus on what the committed outcomes are. People are realizing that maybe 5 pages of a simple, easy to use commitment is better than 20 pages of just promises and a lot of dependencies, which never really takes place. So that's another theme which we're quite consistently seeing.
And the last one is our urging and the need to keep current with the market pricing tenets. So the idea of what is the fair market price, that's changing constantly. We've seen a drop. We hope that drop stays, but we think that there's a need to keep up with not only the pricing elements, but the trends, but also making sure that you're getting continually a good deal on your other terms and conditions. All right, so let's look at some data. We just did a question here in the industry just in the past week or so, and we asked the questions: what are enterprises doing to drive benefits or using as levers in their outsourcing contracts? And so, not surprising, the number one issue or the number one opportunity here was to increase the level of automation adoption. And this is actually, when done right, a win-win situation. So this is the ability to drive cost savings by deploying automation, which allows both the suppliers to reduce their resources, but also reduce their prices that are being the overall change. The number two is the price reduction in overall rebates. So, obviously you can go to a line item level and you can reduce the overall cost of an FTE or an output-based metric, or you can look at an overall invoice level rebate. Those are the top two. Change in scope and process redesign are another popular option. So that's kind of the current facts. Another question we had in there was related to the next chart.
Yeah. So clearly, there's been pricing reduction across all services, right? This is something which we've seen consistently. Now, there could be some variations across specific timelines, functions, and as Michael mentioned, it could be either at a line item level or at an overall TCV level. One thing to bear in mind, and what we're really conscious of, is that nothing really lasts forever. As the world starts opening up, service provider performance, even otherwise, is going up quite robustly. The window to negotiate better pricing will obviously come down. So it's imperative for enterprises to really not think that there's months and months available to look at it. So it's better to use this phase of the cyclic rhythm to course correct pricing. And that precisely brings us to the focus of this webinar. Okay, so very quickly, what are we going to talk about? One, clearly, we're going to question that, our enterprise is continuing to pay the same as they did back in 2020. What's really the opportunity, and what should be explored. The oft-asked question, what we should focus on, is it just simply rates negotiation? Should we look at an overall commercial model overhaul? How would that work? And then, I guess most importantly, some action steps. What would the roadmap look like for the coming months? The sources for today's webinar are all based on our recent sole-sourced competitive deal advisory experience. Any perspectives that we've seen in a lot of the recent mid-tenure contract strategic engagement reviews we've been part of, and of course, discussions with multiple enterprise strategic outsourcing stakeholders.
Okay, so the agenda for today is really what has changed in the past year. Then we'll talk about the impact on pricing, and then we'll talk about how to plan for that in the coming months, and then we'll get to our question and answer. So with that, Abhishek, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let me talk a little bit about rationalization, and we touched on it during when Michael and I were discussing the convictions. Let me perhaps go back a few years. So over the past decade or so, portfolios have become overly fragmented. And this is because it was needed to meet ever-changing demands, business expansion, new technology adoption, niche vendors, etc. Now, as enterprises have grappled with how to manage these, we've seen extensive vendor rationalization efforts in play. And a few of the core objectives, if I would just say, of course, controlling cost is a major element, to try and use both competitive tension and also an element of scale to drive down, overall cost and bring in some efficiencies from that perspective. Another important impact or driver has also been to implement new operating or delivery models, right? So it's not just about cost, it's also about trying to change the structure to drive in more accountability, alignment with some strategic partners, which drives better investments, and then also implementing some new age delivery models like agile and DevOps. Right? So, so that's the kind of overall view. If you look at two of the key kind of driving factors apart from the ones we've mentioned. Now, one of the things which I'm personally quite passionate about, and I've seen the real value which brings all of this, is the whole element around simplification of contracts, right? Making them more agile, making them more tuned to what really the need of the hour is, right? And as we talk about it on the next page, fragmented models often mean a lot of variability and ambiguity in contracts. For the same service, you can have different terms, different conditions, different fees at risk. I mean, things could be as different as chalk and cheese. So, so that's why there's a lot of focus on this aspect.
Yeah, and Abhishek, when I see the innovation there at the top left there, I think back. This has been an age-old challenge for the industry. And this is one of those things where people get involved in a deal, they negotiate hard, they get a go from a model A to a model B, and everybody feels really good about it. Hopefully, done it at a lower price, and then 2 years, 5 years, 7 years goes by, and the world has changed, but the deal hasn't. So I think that's always going to be it's the number one issue I've seen going back 3 decades, 2 decades. It still continually shows up at the top of our list today. So it's something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely, Michael. And the thing with innovation is that there's a desire from the enterprise clients to drive innovation, and they expect it. There's an intent from the service provider community to develop innovation, but nothing really comes for free. I think it's that, it's that underlying commercial construct, which means that there's a lot of talk around it. There's a lot of intent around it, boardroom discussions about the art of the possible, but how it really translates, when the rubber hits the ground, it's been wanting in action. So that's where we're seeing a lot of focus on not just the talk, but also the walk. So we're seeing more and more examples of a quantified view of innovation, right? Real clarity in what percentage of TCV is going to be invested. What are going to be the channels for that? What's the specific buckets? Some have even put in special things like SLA metrics to drive or track the number of innovative ideas brought forth, etc. So, this is where a lot of this stuff is being quantified. People are happy with a lesser number of these, but things which are committed. And same goes for committed efficiency improvements. People are wanting, simpler formats, but something that's really, really, baked into the whole commercial model, right? And not just something which they can expect that, out of good luck that they may have it. So, I guess, Ricky, we were also talking about, when we look at the whole negotiation simplification aspect, we were talking a few days ago about tough negotiation postures. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Thanks, Abhishek. So let me take you through what we believe is happening, right? So supplier financial performance of course, is up in terms of both revenue and margins. Many enterprise clients, however, are grappling with low single-digit margins, and they're obviously finding it hard to reconcile those with the 20 to 25% margins. And of course, they're maintaining a very tough posture on how to get it. Now, some of the examples we've seen on the enterprise side are that they're trying to set targets in place for the targeted fee or spend reduction to be achieved through the year. And for that purpose, they're using RFPs or even e-auctions to aggressively use more competitive tension, all with the aim to lock down pricing. On the supplier side as well, right? There's pushback for sure. However, there is some leeway made for some clients who could be more strategic. But overall, I think service providers have been and largely been successful in terms in kind of pivoting to mostly win-win themes to use change in models or get them to spend on transformation to get the overall cost of delivery down as well. Abhishek, I think on similar lines, we were also discussing in terms of competitive tension. We were discussing an interesting theme a few days back, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So, having been in the industry for almost now 18 years, the extent to which external benchmarks are being used is unprecedented, right? Let me do a quick compare contrast as you can see on the page. So traditionally, we would see more of contract mandated benchmarking happening once every 18 months to 2 years. Many enterprise clients using median as the typical gold standard. Hey, let's get to the median, we're fine. And standard rates focused benchmarking that, hey, let's just look at what the rates are and then take it from there. Now, what we're seeing is that even in an RFX, RFP kind of a situation, enterprise client procurement stakeholders want an independent view of what the ongoing current rates are even before they get the responses, right? So they want to be like one step ahead of the providers. The median is now easily at the 10th and 20th percentile, right? So that's the whole standard, especially for enterprises that have a significant spend with the providers. And then there's much more interest in understanding what the sizing metrics are, the Q as we talk about, and how that can be impacted to, control the overall cost. So, what that means is that literally there's very little leeway that enterprises seem to be providing from an overall tougher stance perspective when it comes to these scenarios.
Yeah, and Abhishek, I love to talk about the queue. So the price is always fun, is the kind of the easy part, but the queue is where the money's made or lost, or the opportunity for improvement is really on that quantity side of the invoice. So I always love that one. So let's do this. Let's do a quick poll here where we're going to give you an opportunity to have some input. And so work from home has definitely been one of those top strategies for 2020 and 2021 that have been implemented across the board. The question has that been a success? And if it's been a success commercially in terms of productivity, has that resulted in an increase or decrease in the rates that are being passed on to you? And so what we wanted to do was just see, this is a dynamic that's new in the marketplace. There was lots of consternation around, the quality aspect of it, but there's also a productivity and economic aspect of it. So, all right, so we've got, there's one large number in the middle. All right, we'll close the poll right now and go ahead and show the results. And Abhishek, I see the big number is no change.
Yeah.
But I do see a little bit of a bend toward a decrease in price being allocated to about 20%. So maybe a little bit, 10% of the people are paying a little more, but roughly 25% or so are paying a little less.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a skew towards those who are paying less, and this has been a very common question, Michael. I think, well, there's been at least 10 times where you and I have discussed this. Which ways is it actually going, right? So interestingly, as we've also done some analysis, over as we see over the next page. Now, the commercial or fee impact of work from home it's been a consistent question. Enterprise use on this too have been varied. As the dust has settled down, it's moved from maybe a year back when it was, hey, how do we make sure work from home works and delivers the service? And it very quickly evolved into what really should be the commercial considerations. So we've done some analysis of what really it looks like, and of course, it could, a bit of a caveat, it could be different in different situations. But typically, if you were to look at the three main criteria where providers could be saving on actual delivery costs, a huge chunk of that would be the real estate infrastructure, which is now being moved around. Leases may not be being reviewed, etc. A little bit on the technology infrastructure and some other operating expenses which have gone down, and the impact could be anywhere between, per our analysis, 7 to 11%. Now that's the cost impact. Suppliers, in some cases, we're seeing to be passing on savings of anywhere between 5 to 8% based on the positive impact of hybrid work from home operating model, right? So again, this is our analysis. This is based on some early stage data that we're seeing based on rates, contracts that have been renegotiated to, or kind of reworked to make sure that this saving is passed on.
Yeah, and I think this is a dynamic we're seeing in the marketplace. It's still the leading edge. Just as we saw in real time quick poll there, people are indicating that a savings is possible. We'll just have to see how that works out over the longer term. That's why we say keep in touch. All right, so let's move on to the next section here. And what we just did is a quick poll and some reflections on the work from home model. Let's talk about some of the other impacts on pricing. And this is where we're going to kind of summarize our findings and our sense of what we're hearing in the marketplace in terms of actual contracted rates. And so, Ricky, bring us into our reality here based on your databases, what you see.
Sure. So let's talk about the first category, which is largely focused on IT applications, digital services, and consulting services. Now, we did see a sharp decline for some of the roles within IT applications, digital, and consulting over the past 1 year. The highest consistent drop was observed, ironically, across the most commoditized set of services, which is primarily support roles, as well as across some of the most value-added services like consulting. The reasons, of course, were different because enterprises had kind of gone into a temporary pause mode in terms of discretionary spend. That's why there was a sharp dip in terms of the consulting rates. It was even sharper during the May to September timeframe, where we saw temporary discounts being offered, and consultants have been willing to do projects at steep 20-25% discounts as well. However, as we talked about earlier, I think we are seeing a recovery of sorts in terms of the demand, and it won't be long in terms of when we start seeing rates as well, following a V-shaped recovery and rates reaching back to the pre-COVID levels as well. However, the past 1 year has seen kind of a sharp decline across most categories that we've tracked. Moving on, I think it's not just the rates. I think the overall efficiency and the productivity has further increased right now. If we talk about the year-on-year savings, we used to look at numbers around 15, 20, 25%, let's say as close as 3 years back. But now the starting point has become as high as 30 to 50%. And that's just a starting point. And we've seen deals where providers or enterprises asking for as high as 48 to 49% ACV reduction over a 5-year deal term. There are different levers that we've seen and providers adopt to be able to pass on some of these benefits, right? So one of those, one of the most common ones is increase in terms of the offshoring mix. And now with everything being remote, the applicability of onshore or face-to-face requirements seem to have changed. In fact, we are nowadays we're not seeing most clients fringe or frown upon hearing offshoring mix as high as 90-95% as well. In fact, the way solutions are being created nowadays, you start at close to 90% and almost end at 98-99% over a 5-year deal term. So the general norm of 30 to 50% is here to stay, and providers seem to be pulling different levers, like in fact even implementing advanced automation solutions next, like selfie and various different sort of automation solutions to kind of being able to achieve this. Now, Abhishek, I think let's talk about some of the key characteristics of some of these unreal offers that we've seen over the last year.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. So again, basically, there's, we really can't ignore some of the instances of hyper competitive pricing that we've seen in the past 1 year, right? There were times when the rates were really too good to believe. And for a moment, if we thought that it was rather one-off, lo and behold, another deal situation has something like this. Now, it'll be wrong to say that every deal situation has been unreal, but the number of instances has definitely been high, and sometimes even making us wonder, how the supplier would be making a margin on that, right? Now, some of the characteristics we've seen could be clearly, zero transition fees, and we're very cautious about saying zero because sometimes it's actually baked in, and you can understand that it's being cross subsidized. But think of it, huge investment in risk taken on transformation, absolutely rock bottom rates. You can really see that they're giving transition for free, right? And on top of that, to give some comfort to the clients, we're seeing a lot of high risk service credit regime, as much as 300% severity weight, 15 16% fees at risk, committing to 55, 60, 70% ACP reduction over 5 years. So, if you combine all of this, the whole deal TCV and the commitment and skin in the game becomes so compelling that it really bounces back to that word, really unreal. And this could be across applications, digital, in some cases, maybe even infra. So speaking of infra, IT infrastructure space, I think there's always something interesting going on there. And Ricky, I know this is your sweet spot. So what's the latest on that?
Sure. Let's talk about IT infrastructure. So within IT infrastructure, what we've observed over the last 1 year is that we can probably classify it under three specific clusters. Now, if you look at the traditional clusters, traditional services like compute, storage, database, network, so on, there is a lot of standardization, increase in productivity and efficiency, which has kind of led to a material reduction in unit rates, almost to the tune of almost 7 to 9% in the last 1 year. However, when it comes to digital workplace services, the whole remote working boosted the demand for collaboration platforms and greater adoption of digital experience management platforms. So in that particular service, we've almost seen the unit rates to be almost steady or probably even a minor uptick of 1 to 2%. Now, however, when it comes to cloud and security, this is a very hot area for most enterprises. We've seen a significant number of enterprises explore or even start their cloud migration journeys over the last 1 year. So cloud and security is an area where there's a lot of transformation investments happening, coupled with, of course, the high skill requirements, which has kind of led to a significant amount of increase in rates for both cloud and security services. So and as expected, I think in addition to the price quantum, we also have observed in terms of what we are calling as more granular and discrete pricing metrics that we see in IT infrastructure services. Okay. Yeah. So just talking about a few examples here. Earlier, we used to see this black box kind of a pricing for security services. Come 2020, 2021, now we are seeing much more discrete granular units for even cybersecurity. Example, we are seeing metrics like price per CASB user or price per EDR endpoint, or even for something like a next-gen SIM platform, something like a price per EPS or a gray box pen test. We've also seen a significant amount of enterprises adopting platform as a services, right? So for example, we've seen enterprises move to platform as a service offerings offered by the hyperscalers like AWS Lambda or AWS DynamoDB, or even moving to containers on the public cloud world. So of course, service providers have created managed service offerings around it. For example, an organization, as we've kind of increased, have we seen increased adoption of serverless computing platform Lambda from AWS? Organizations still needed support for managing the environment variables, configuring roles and permissions, executing sync and unsync invocation. So we've seen providers create a managed service offering around the same, priced on each Lambda function they suppose. So that it's much more granular, and the objective is not to have more. The objective is not to make it more complex, but to have more control on what consumption units really drive the fee and therefore can be managed adequately.
Yeah, Ricky, when I saw this list, I had to think about my how current I was on some of these pricing elements. So these were some new names and new things. And I'm thinking if you're a sourcing or procurement person and on this call, you're thinking, what are these measures? Because you're used to seeing servers, you're used to seeing desktop units, you're used to seeing gigabytes of storage. And I start seeing Lambdas and Kinesis and Azure pods. We're probably going to have a whole entire webinar, a whole entire session just explaining what all these new words mean and how these units come into play. And I think that's going to be really, really important for especially those that are buyers on this call to think about what are these things and how do they work, and are you getting the good deal? Again, I go back to the good deal is always an important part of the thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Michael. I think as the ecosystem widens, as there are more and more hyperscalers and third-party partners coming into the mix, we will see some of these pricing metrics to become more complex and contracting to become more complex. So absolutely, I think bang on. Of course, even the current adoption of some of these services is not as high, or the spend is rather not high. But going forward, we do see a significant amount of some amount of potential for these services to be adopted by large enterprises.
Yeah, but they're new and they're interesting right now. And I think, I don't think they're going to go away. I think they're only going to grow in size. And I think that's the important part. All right, so let's one of the things we offer during these sessions is an ability to get a slice of our data. So we're giving you the webinar's presentation has to be general by definition, but we'd like to give you a specific set of data to look at. And if you're an enterprise that's a buyer of services and you're interested in getting a slice of data for the IT infrastructure output-based resource units. So these are things like workplace services, service desk, private cloud, server management, storage and backup, public cloud, and want to see that in a geographical sense. And we can reach back out to you and provide those unique metrics and data for you. Just go ahead and click this, and we'll leave this open here for just another 15 seconds if you're interested in getting a slice of data. Of course, we have a lot of other output-based metrics in the BPO categories that if those are important to you, we're happy to provide those and give you a slice at. We know that once you look at a little bit of the data, you'll always probably want more, so we're prepared to invest in doing this with you guys. Okay, let's close it off, and we'll be back with you on those metrics. And you'll have an opportunity, if you didn't click there, you have an opportunity to get that later. Okay, so let's move on to the next
BPO.
thing. Yeah, BPO. We can't forget BPO. Abhishek, I know that's a passionate topic for you.
Absolutely, and I was thinking that, hey, maybe some of our colleagues, stakeholders, friends on the webinar might be thinking, hey, this seems to be all about IT. No, not at all. Where could BPO be left behind? So interestingly, for BPO services, the underlying resource rate. So overall TCV, yes, reduction. People have got savings, people have got reductions as we spoke, but the underlying resource rates have either been static or seen a minor reduction, right? So it's not like a resource would be at X and now it's at X minus 15%, right? Now the real deal sweeteners here are in the form of other commercial elements, right? Transformation benefits don't need to wait till they accrue. Some amount of front loading has always been there, but the extent that's happening now is unreal. Year one expenses can be tided over by a pretty neat deal bonus, as some providers may be willing to provide. They're also trying to keep deals sole sourced by offering renewal discounts at an overall level, along with, of course, more skin in the game on automation related costs and terms. So overall, trying to make it as easy for the enterprise to buy, as easy to retain without really going competitive, etc. So this is again something, a different form of overall commercial attractiveness that we're seeing.
Okay, so let's open it up to some data. Let's do a quick poll here, get some real-time feedback from participation in those that are on the webinar. And so what we're going to do is ask you the question, because it's going to be a prelude for a slide that's coming up, and we'll show you what our thoughts, but we'll get your input too. For any upcoming BPO deals that you have or renewals, how important is to moving some kind of unit-based pricing? And as a long-term 3-decade type person in this industry, I would say that most of our deals going back a couple of decades were output based. And when we went to a lot of movement to the offshore model, we moved to labor arbitrage, but we wanted to kind of get a sense from you as how much is moving back to moving back to some kind of unit-based pricing based on outputs. Okay, so, well, this is interesting. It is definitely on a lot of people's minds. So let's go ahead and publish the results in 2 seconds. Get your last votes in. Okay, so Abhishek here. I'm looking at people are definitely in the consideration stage, but
yeah.
Well, let's just start with let's actually start at the bottom here. Not important at all. Only less than 10% said that wasn't important at all. So maybe we're back to the future on this with a quarter of the people already have that metric, but there's like almost 75% in the middle there that are thinking about it or in the process of making it happen.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I guess that's also consistent overall at what we're seeing, as we'll just talk about on the next page. So clearly, in the BPO space, this is a pretty consistent question, right? Which comes up every week or so, right, with one enterprise stakeholder or the other that I interact with, right, averaging it out, of course. There remains no clear answer. While definitely we do see a more pronounced usage of these models, there's a lot of consideration set going on. A lot of enterprises are keen to explore other models as they go. But overall, there's also a certain maturity which has come in where clients understand that the applicability actually depends on the underlying service scope and characteristics. There's no real one size fits all. There's no, hey, let's just go output outcome. It has to be based on a lot of considerations. I'll talk about one or two trends each that we're seeing, which make it a rather interesting mix. So on the output based side, whenever there's unit based pricing for some of the larger deals where there's a large number of transactions, many enterprises are now asking providers to go greenfield when they want to estimate their bid, right? They're not telling them how many current people serve those number of transactions to whatever, right? So it's all, there's no real starting point, and that's what sometimes makes, solutioning a tad complex. But then that's also where, a test of, where and how the specific provider may have already done similar pieces. There's also more and more proliferation of multiple unique resource units, many of which could be bespoke to that particular environment. Now, the implication for this is that it becomes more complex to compare and benchmark. So that's a bit of a downstream consideration, but just something which we thought we'd call out. On the outcome-based side, clearly, there's a strong linkage across services, which we're seeing to the overall user experience. So it's not just about transaction accuracy or some of those metrics. Some linkage of fee to CSAT or other metrics, which are kind of catch-all, because and this is more to do with the fact that there could be engagements where all metrics are green and the stakeholders are really, really in a bad mood, right? We've seen enough of those, that watermelon approach, as we see. So that's why, there's some linkage to it, so that it's not just about the metrics, it's also about the experience. And then more and more instances of some zero investment transformation, right? Really, truly self-funded models being piloted to deliver some kind of value in cash strap times. Of course, there's a risk assessment done by the provider before proposing such a thing, but it's becoming much more common, which is obviously, portraying and generating interest in the enterprise side to pursue this for commercial benefits.
Yeah, and so this is a long-term perspective on the industry. Outcome-based pricing, is certainly this kind of the sexy part of people saying, hey, I should be thinking about this, should be doing it. And my experience on this in real life has been it's a right time, right place scenario. And so I think most people will be happy with an output-based pricing trend over the long term, with a little bit of outcome-based pricing for where you're looking to make change and innovation. And I think that's really where it needs to be. It does get challenging over time to, as you said, to attribute who gets the benefit, what's the cause and effect. So who did the impact? CSAT is a perfect example of it. Was it the service provider in the outsourcing contract, or was it the product that was causing improvement in CSAT or not CSAT? I mean, there's lots of things there. So I think if you keep it contained into a specific set of investments in innovation, I think that's where it really shines. But don't always look at it and say the top right or the outcome is always the best thing. It has its time and place.
Yeah. And Michael, an interesting element also is the increased demand, and this kind of links with the whole unit-based approach, that granular view, rather than just putting FTEs or people to do that work, as we'll see on the next page. So given the uncertainty in business environment, right, and overall evolution of services in general, the standard 25 to 30% threshold of volumes that beyond which there's a bit of a rebaselining, right, or repricing which needs to happen. Enterprises are saying that, hey, I need a wider band than that, right? There's some certainty of pricing, which we know that, of course, the provider can bake in some degree of risk, but they don't want to be in situations where every time the volume gets to about a 25% here and there, they're renegotiating the rates, right? So they want it as high as 30 to 45%, and there could be slabs in between. So this is just to ensure some visibility, certainty, and overall simplicity of doing business with the provider. Now, similarly, a lot of fingers have been burned by keeping contractual tenets the same over 5, 6, 7 years, right? Businesses change, underlying technologies change, expectations change. Sometimes they become more stringent. Sometimes they could even ease out a bit, right? And that would have implications of how these things can be made a win-win for both parties. So there's a need for those tenets to be able to be changed during the tenure, right? SLA metrics, allocation percentages, and clients want some rather quick models like a contract change note or some easy mechanism, rather than literally having an army of lawyers, debating for weeks to make that change. So again, some of these things, again, tie back to the overall concept of simplification and standardization. But we just thought it's important to call out because we do expect more of these conversations to come forth in these discussions.
All right, a lot of good dynamics there on the impact on pricing. Let's talk about the next couple coming months. If you're thinking about this, what do you need to do? And what are your recommendations, Abhishek?
Absolutely. So, let me start by being a bit provocative, right? By nature, people who know me generally, understand that I'm normally not normally that provocative, but the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about a couple of sensitive areas, right? So, clearly one-time milestone-based benchmarks, and this is coming from a benchmarker, I assume it may be past its time, right? The pace at which change is happening, coupled with the time and effort sometimes needed to conduct such an exercise. And such an exercise does have its value in specific situations, but it often means that the contract always remains in catch-up mode. I'm not even talking about the back and forth which happens to agree on the consequences of the benchmark. Sometimes things can get hot, aggressive. There's a lot of discussion. You can get a lot of passionate, debates. And overall, we're just wondering, if really that's the way to approach commercial competitiveness and ensuring that. Now, a number of enterprises are now adopting what I would call a minimally invasive as a service model to benchmarking, right? Where any rates, terms and conditions, other commercial tenets they're really assessed on an ongoing basis, and course correction is made before the gap becomes too big to close, right? So think of it like, the moment, either when there's a change in requirement or new resources need to be added or, skills need to be calibrated, it then becomes a joint process where with, ongoing use of external insight, external benchmarks, they don't need to wait for 3, 4, 2 years when the gap really becomes so much that, it needs, CXO level intervention to get to resolve that debate, right? So this is where our view is that really ensuring that constant view is going to be critical and much more beneficial than waiting for a one-time exercise. Okay, if you move to the next page, this is another sensitive topic again, right? There could be certain areas, and this is again coming from our experience, where everyone in the business knows, right, that the suppliers are being overpaid. Even with that knowledge, for some reasons, these pockets, if I may say, they've been hard to rectify. We see a lot of enterprise procurement, folks tending to be struggling with this. And while there could be multiple scenarios, examples, we've just laid out 2 archetypes here, right? So archetype 1 is, specific business units or product groups, right? Generally, those who may have had some very niche or uncommon requirements, so they believe, and generally, because of that nature, averse to supplier consolidation, tend to have a fragmented supplier base because they want best of breed. And this is where they're highly likely to be paying materially high for some capabilities or skills which have now become commonplace. They're easily available, with other providers, and there's really no need to be held at gunpoint and paying through the roof. That's one. The second archetype could be on the opposite side. This could be a large incumbent with pretty strong relationships across the business, typically operating with minimal competition, well versed with the organization, generally open to provide flexibility and ease in, generally how to work. But over time, the lack of competition, generally tends to be some roles or services being rather obnoxiously priced. So it's important to look at these areas and not just ignore them, because over time they have a bad habit of being rather pervasive or infectious, and this could then spread to other business units as well. So just being sure to challenge the status quo, in our view, would be important.
All right. I think one of the results of a supplier rationalization exercise that we've been talking about over the last 30 minutes is also that certain strategic suppliers will end up getting a much larger wallet share and spend profile. So, however, in return for this, enterprises are seen to be demanding for materially higher book of business or volume discount. So, we did have a traditional table in terms of book of business and volume discounts that used to be there in contracts earlier that still exists. However, what has changed over the last 1 year is that the percentages in set in these have become more aggressive. And the differences in the last 1 year has been anywhere between as low as 1 percentage point to as much as 4 percentage points of additional discount for a similar annual spend. So enterprises should definitely explore how to bring their agreements in line with market norms. Moving on, I think there was also a question around how do you link incentives with outcomes, and it seemed to be like a very popular question. So I think on linkages with outcomes, our view would be to take an approach which is best suited for the specific context. There is no one size fits all in this case. Broadly, we think of this that there could be two different scenarios: a pure outcome-based model where the supplier influences business outcomes. For example, revenue recovery or member enrollment. In such cases, there can be models with a fee linked to every level of business impact. However, for some other services such as application managed services or application development, it becomes harder to have that direct linkage. So in this case, some kind of other outcomes which can be defined, such as CSAT, ticket reduction, NPS scores, or even the newer innovative XLA construct that we are seeing in case of workplace services, and some part of the fee being attached to some of these metrics. So that's something that that kind of applies to a lot of the market service that we see in the market.
Okay. So, what's the way forward? Really, how do we bring in the how to make it happen? What could be some steps to be taken? Clearly, in terms of planning for this, there's not a need to embark on a mega supplier rationalization initiative, because let's be realistic. Different priorities in the organization could be stretched, different types of contracts which you can't get out of, etc. And this could actually be done in pockets, right? If it can be consolidated across organization, great. Even if not, it could be for certain products or certain business unit. The key is really to use competitive tension strategically. And I mentioned the term strategically. It's not just about simply releasing an RFP. It won't get people far. But the intent is really to shake up some of the inertia which gets built in from both sides, right? Both from the service provider as well as the enterprise. So, again, having a solid baseline and an objective view on where existing commercials are is really important, because that can help enterprises really press the button on areas where there is enough and more gap to cover. We've seen cases where some enterprises have pressed the gas on everything and expected the similar amount of discount from every provider. So that's kind of unfair and may not yield the best results, because it's really important to focus on those chunks where the maximum juice can be squeezed. So again, this generally overall helps at the stage between even before a supplier market reach out. So look at it in pockets, leverage it strategically, to really get to a better level of contracting through competitive tension.
All right, so great conversation here, guys. Really appreciate it. We're going to move to the Q&A, but Abhishek, we don't like to make a big commercial here, but why don't you give a 1-minute commercial on what your practice does and how you can support clients here?
Absolutely. So I'll just quickly summarize it. How we support procurement, strategic vendor management teams. And now this could be either through ongoing memberships, right, or one-time projects. So in terms of the memberships, there's the outsourcing excellence, which is broader spectrum market intelligence to maximize overall value from sourcing, right? So think about provider strategies, category management, risk management, etc. Pricing as a service is again something which is much deeper, much more focused, ongoing pricing, performance, metrics, analytics, and of course SME insights to sustain to get to spend reduction and actually sustain it. But having said that, this is not all. We can definitely support on a range of bespoke projects, right from price benchmarking through to workforce strategy, through to provider rationalization, as the context may be.
All right, fantastic. All right, so we got lots and lots of pages and pages of questions here. I'm going to try to pick a few of them here. All right, so question number one here: are e-auctions really effective? While it may drive down pricing, does it due to competitive pressure, doesn't it impact the business by taking costs out that may impact delivery? And I think
Yep.
the implication there is lowest cost always the best.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that, and that's a very topical question that's come up. This is something new that we're seeing across a number of enterprises that's being used. And please forgive me if the answer sounds cliched, but it is true. It actually depends on what they're being used for. E-auctions have been successful for driving competition in areas where there's this good amount of volume, relatively commoditized skills, and something that can be clearly defined, right? Be it a specific role, be it a specific resource unit, which is understood universally, or for some time and material rates, so that there's no real confusion. Now, obviously, the risk remains that if it's driven down to the lowest kind of a cost, and there's no other guardrails in the contract which gives some amount of assurance on delivery, yes, there is. But where it works is A, the unit can be easily and universally defined, and B, the contractual tenets are such that that come what may, you're always assured of that level of quality of that resource or service, right? So without these guardrails, then it's risky, but we're seeing enterprises manage quite well.
Okay. Let's take another question here that really kind of hints at the same thing around promising a quality, but in the hyper competitive scenario, are enterprises willing to risk tier 2 and tier 3 and smaller service providers without compromising quality? Why don't you give it a shot? I got some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I lost you for about a second there, Michael. Could you repeat that?
In the hyper competitive scenario, are enterprises willing to risk tier 3 and small service providers without compromising quality?
Okay, so yeah, in a hyper competitive scenario, interesting question. So clearly, it's in some cases, there may be the desire to really when they want to meet cost, to see if they're getting some kind of some kind of really good pricing from tier 2, tier 3, and they've still worked with those in the past, right? They have that experience and some level of assurance that there may be some difference in overall service, but the overall intent, the general ways of working are fine. They may be able to do it. But at the same time, sometimes that hyper competitiveness, it's not that we've only seen it with tier 2 or tier 3 providers. We've even seen it with the tier 1. So again, deal to deal, scenario to scenario, that's at least the direction we've taken. We've seen it being taken.
Yeah. So let's talk about there is a time and place for smaller or more niche competitors, and I think specifically two places. One is going to be where they have a very industry specific solution, and so if they have something that's in your industry and it's very competitive, they may actually be the number 1 or 2 player for you. And so they may not be big overall at a mega supplier, but they certainly can be effective in your case. And the other one is where you need specific top leadership attention. And so there may be cases where you don't want to just be one of many, but you want to be one that's really special and where they're willing to invest both time and money in your organization. So there's always safety in big, but there's agility and opportunity in those that are smaller. So I wouldn't ignore them. I would certainly, but choose carefully. Okay, ACV, Abhishek, that's an easy one for you. I'll give you that one.
Yeah, that's the annual contract value.
Okay. All right. So how about this one? Have you seen growth on customer success practices being applied to increase value on these long-term contracts, like 5 years, for instance?
So,
Well, let me take.
Yeah, why don't you take a stab? Yeah.
So here's a perfect example of outcome pricing. Okay, and the outcome pricing, customer success is an ideal state for everybody. Has a potential to be win-win. And when we see outsourcing contracts that are set up around that, and they're really designed to take you from one plateau to a new plateau, that is truly a win-win situation. But there's a limitation to them. That's what I was indicating earlier, is you don't want everything to become outcome based, because there's a certain level of investment and there's a certain level of cause and effect. And if your organization, like CSAT or something like that, you can impact a portion of CSAT and you can improve the overall time, agility, quality, but you can't impact everything. And so you want to make sure that those that are making the investments are also have the scope and the ability to influence the outcomes. And it can go both ways. So one organization can feel like, hey, they're not doing their part, and that results in me losing or paying more. Or the other organization can say, hey, they're taking too much credit. So, hey, you did something, but we did even more. So, and you play both sides of this equation. But again, I tend to think of these things as more project oriented, and the outcome is more measured in a year or two, and that's the cause and effect in the investment horizon. It could be a little longer, but over a 5-year period, you got to have that balancing act of cause and effect and who has the scope and shared responsibility. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Nope, you've captured it well.
Okay, all right. So again, I'm an advocate for outcome-based pricing, but it's not the panacea. Okay, all right. So I think we're out of time here. We always want to end on time. There are a bunch of other questions here that we did not get to. Abhishek and Ricky, I assume you'll be able to try to answer those things.
Yes, we'll connect individually and answer it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And the question will the deck be shared, and the answer is absolutely. There will be a follow-up email here. And so with that, just want to point to the fact that you can reach us on our website. Lots and lots of good content, whether it be the blog or on there's plenty of other material there. And so want to thank you for your time. Appreciate all the input we get along the way. And if there's ever an issue that you want to talk with us, our names were available on the webinar. You can certainly reach out to myself, Abhishek, or Ricky, and we'd be happy to have a discussion with you. And again, spring is here. Let's figure out how we can look at the brighter side of life and look at the rest of 2021 with my pent up optimism that I think we're all going to enjoy. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.